We are good. Sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we're in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Lynn Nesbitt. I'll be chairing the panel today. Joining me on the panel to my right is Linda McFadden and Richard Whitbread via Zoom. Our recording secretary is Jaswinder Kumar, and our assessor today is Nathan Kupfer. We'll be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We'll be hearing items 1 and 2 and 3 through 7 on our docket today. Mr. Kumar, please affirm the assessor's and the applicant's testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Nathan Kupfer.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, please state your full name.
Mark Newman.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kupfer and Mr. Newman.
Good afternoon.
We're going to start with item number 1 on our agenda. Today is 440 Dawn Avenue. Before we begin, are there any preliminary issues that need to be addressed by either party?
I have a preliminary issue, and it does not relate to this property specifically, but it relates to 3 of the remaining properties on the docket. The assessor has included post-reference date information on 3 of those properties. He's included it in multiple different ways, in the form of a sale, in the form of questionnaires that are from 2021. I have drawn this to the assessor's attention. I have invited the assessor to replace those briefs with briefs that remove or redact the offending information. He has responded to me declining to do so and indicating simply that the Board can strike out whatever they consider to be irrelevant. And of course, I understand the Board can do that. And I understand, of course, that the Board will indicate that they will not take certain things into account. My concern, however, is a greater one. And the fact that it occurred on 3 properties and in multiple ways suggests to me that it was not an error or an omission, but rather it was deliberate. And the problem is that's not the way things are done around here. I think we all know that. We all have been here for a long time. I frankly don't know what to do about it. It's a problem. It's a concern for me, because as much as I am comfortable that the board will do its utmost best to remove these considerations from its mind. The fact of the matter is these considerations are brought forward and they shouldn't be. And a willing buyer at April 1 of 2021 wouldn't know these things. So I just raised that with you. It will become more apparent as we come to the individual properties. I expressed my concern. I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy that the assessor declined to remove the offending information and replace it, but I don't know what I can do about it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Newman, for raising that concern. Yes, you are correct. The board will not be considering any post-reference materials. I recognize it's in the briefs. We can't unsee it once we've seen it, but we won't be taking it into consideration at all. Mr. Kupfer, do you have a response?
No, I think these issues are probably best addressed one by one as we go through the briefs. Mr. Newman is correct that the post-reference sales information that get automatically populated onto our briefs, I did not remove in this instance. The income and expense information I did include on purpose for reasons outside of the rental rate per foot, but rather for the physical space, the care and control, the condition of the property that we discuss as of 2023 and 2024, which makes up the basis of the assessment. So as always, all of the assessments that we're providing today are model driven. They're not based on any of these post-reference sales or post-reference leases. This is just surrounding information, some of which should have been removed, some of which I've chosen to include for other reasons.
And Mr. Kupfer, where there is post-reference information, does the assessor have the ability to redact it, cross it out so the board can't see it for future hearings that you may be doing?
Yes.
Okay, so that probably would be an expectation of the board that you do that in all fairness, because we can't consider it and it's inappropriate to include it. Okay, let's proceed with item number 1, 440 Dawn Avenue. Mr. Kupfer, when you're ready, please.
That's file number 22-2812, roll number 12020001200, street address 440 Dawn Avenue. The owner is Fluid Development Inc., excuse me. They are a tenant of the building, but not the sole tenant. They occupy one of the smaller spaces. This is a commercial office building, constructed in 1956 with an effective age of 1977. So the department has remarked on some work that's been done here in terms of renovations. It doesn't look like a 1956 office. The leasable area is 4,520 square feet, and we have a model-derived 2023 assessment of $953,000. If you turn to page 2 of my brief, you can see we have no recent sales here to consider for our valuation. You can get an overhead view of the building. So this is set one property back off of Osborne. I believe that's the Cheban ice cream store there in front of it, if I'm not mistaken. Page 3 of my brief has another photo. You can see the front face of the building there. It shows well, at least from the exterior. I haven't inspected it. In terms of comparables, these are OFS properties, which just means there are offices outside of the downtown core, typically smaller offices. I've included a rather large sample size here prepared by one of the assessors in our department. It includes a wide range here with an average of $15.85, so weighted average of $16, median of $15, and a min-max between $10 and $22.50. And I've used this, I believe, for the majority, if not all, of our OFS properties today. Page 8 of my brief here, you can see the model-derived workup. Like I said, we have 3 spaces here. The 630 square foot space is the one being occupied by the owner. They're leasing out the other 2 spaces at an arm's length net lease, to my knowledge. We have the first space here, 1,650 square feet, being modeled at $15.52. We scroll down to the income and expense mailer. We can see that that space is being occupied as Unit A by, I believe that's Variety. They're renting the 1,650 square foot space for $2,246 a month. By 12 months divided by the space gives you a net lease rate of $16.33. Like I said, we're modeling it at about 15.5, which tells me that our model is doing a pretty good job of approximating the value of this space. Our next space there, Brant, they're renting the larger space at 2,240 square feet. They're reporting $25.33 per month, which equals $30,396 over the year divided by our space, give you an exact $12 a foot. And that one is being modeled, I believe, at $13 and change. So the first space discussed is being modeled a bit on the lower end. The other one's being modeled a bit on the higher end. And then we don't have a lease for the 630 square foot space. Like I said, this is owner occupied, but given that it's a smaller space, we would expect it to rent for slightly higher at $1 per square foot range. So I'm not surprised to see it coming in at $16.59. So I feel like our net operating income is well supported here. Our capitalization rate, admittedly, is on the lower end at 6.1. For small office space buildings, generally we tend to see these fall kind of in in the mid-range. I would consider this to be a mid-range office. I believe I even handled this property with Mr. Newman at the municipal board. Hearing de novo, obviously these facts aren't relevant, but I believe we settled it at a 6.5% cap rate. So that's likely where I would see this one falling. So with a net operating income of $58,119, which I believe is accurate and reflects the property well, and a cap rate of 6.5%, I would derive a value of $894,000, and that's what I would like to recommend today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Can you just for me repeat the assessed value?
$894,000 using our net operating income and a 6.5% cap rate.
Okay, so all right, let's.
Sorry, then I need that again.
Yeah, okay. 894,000 at a 6.5 cap rate. So Mr. Kupfer, just to confirm, that's lower than the assessed value showing on the front page or even on your model workup?
That's right. That would be a reduction based on the increased cap rate.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Newman, do you have any questions for Mr. Kupfer?
I do. Thank you. So as you've noted, this is a 1956 building that's been updated somewhat, and we've looked at the exterior. Look at page 2 of your brief. And there's a lot of orange lines there. So I think it's important that the board understand exactly which building is the subject. And you made reference to, I think, Chaban Ice Cream.
Yeah, I believe they're one of the tenants of the property in front there, if I'm approximating this right on Osborne.
Right. And just so we're clear, so I'm going to call it, if we look at the picture, at the top of the picture, there's what I'm going to call a large roof.
Yeah.
Immediately below the picture are what I'm going to call 2 roofs, one kind of a brown in tone. The one that's brown in tone is the subject building, correct?
Correct.
And then the building to the left of it, fronting on Osborne, that's an office retail building where Chaban Ice Cream is, correct?
Correct.
And then we've got an apartment building just to the south of that, correct?
Correct.
So effectively, this building has no visibility onto Osborne, does it?
Correct.
And so then, as you told us, there's a variety of comparables. I'm going to skip by those, but I will make one observation about them. Would you agree with me that generally these comparables are on major thoroughfares, major regional roads? Not all, to be clear, but a lot of them?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. So let's then jump ahead. Let's talk about the capitalization rate. And let's look at your page 10. So there's the chart. And I'm going to ask a series of questions in the context of this property. that I think are going to have application in the context of the subsequent properties. So hopefully we can just have them apply. But do you agree with me, Mr. Kupfer, that the subject property is clearly not a downtown A or B office building? Do you agree with that?
It is a suburban office building.
Okay. And the categories of suburban A, suburban B that the assessor has, in many ways, those mirror the reporting that the brokers do, correct?
Correct.
So the subject property, it's a small building. And do you agree with me that frequently the buyers for these small buildings are people who are going to occupy them themselves?
That one's pretty general. I don't think I'd agree with that.
Okay. Do you agree with me that the model tends to set lower capitalization rates for smaller square footage buildings?
Yes, I believe the interpretation is that with a smaller building will come less risk. Less risk means a lower cap rate.
But the model, in theory, is extracting information from the marketplace, isn't it?
That's correct.
And so I'm going to suggest to you that what we see in the marketplace is frequently people who are buying small buildings are people who are going to use them for their own purposes. Do you agree with that?
That is certainly sometimes the case.
Right. And so the motivations of those people and the criteria upon which they buy, I'll suggest to you, are not traditional investment criteria that a sophisticated investor would use. Do you agree? They're motivated to buy for their own use.
In the context of a property that's being purchased for owner occupation, then yes, they're purchasing it for their own use.
Okay. And therefore, their motivation and their investment criteria are not going to be those of a traditional investor. Agreed?
Well, it would be typical of a traditional investor in this marketplace for this type of property. If you're saying that this is what a traditional investor does for this type of property, it wouldn't be comparable to an OFA investor, for example.
Okay. And would it be comparable to a suburban A investor?
A suburban A investor and a suburban B investor?
Yeah.
Is it comparable relatively? Sure.
Are you thinking to answer that question?
Oh, sorry, I did. I must have been cut off. It's kind of a general question, but there's differences between suburban A and suburban B. They're categorized as such. I think it's represented well on the chart.
Okay, so let's come back to the chart. What the chart gives us is a range. The city at the 20th and 80th percentiles is 5.6 and 6.9. Colliers is 6 to 6.75 on the B buildings. Are you familiar with the concept that Colliers includes as part of their sale price the closing costs, which would include land transfer tax and legal fees?
Not to any specific level, no.
What about, have you heard that observation before, just the generality of it?
Not in any sort of depth that I'd be comfortable explaining here, no.
Okay. Have you heard the suggestion that the Colliers capitalization rates are understated because they include closing costs in the sale price?
I've heard from the Colliers agents that they don't feel it's appropriate for us to be using their capitalization rates, and they've tried to make that argument.
Okay. And then, of course, the CBRE and the Cushman, they're at 6.75 to 7 and 6.75 to 7.75. Can we come back to your photos for just a moment of the property on page 2? So This property essentially on the property itself only has the area in the front of the building, and by the front I mean the area towards Osborne. It's only got that area in the front of the building on the property itself for parking. Do we agree?
It looks like it has area onto Don Avenue as well for parking. You can see in the photo below that there's cars
Yes.
parked on the side and the front.
Yes, but I want you to listen carefully to my question, well, let me ask it this way. The area on Dawn, do you agree that that's owned by the city of Winnipeg? It's a boulevard? You can see it's a separate property by the lines.
The area within the line, within
Yes.
440 Dawn, I would posit that it's owned by 440 Dawn. Area outside of that line is likely owned by the city of Winnipeg.
Yes, but the parking area on Dawn, look at your page 3.
I'm looking at it. Yeah, that appears to be included in the square here on
Right.
page 2.
And well, I'm going to suggest to you that the area where the cars are parked along Dawn is land owned by the city of Winnipeg. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree with that. Do you have evidence to show that?
Well, all right, I will show it. That's why I said to you, never mind, I'll get to it in my own evidence. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
I have none, thank you.
Ms. McFadden?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, so neither do I. So Mr. Newman.
Okay, so, and let me say, first of all, thank you to the assessor for the recommendation. It's the first time I've heard it, so I do appreciate it. It's not quite where I'd like to be, but it's a start. So let me take you first to the attachments, starting at page 13 of my brief.
Starts with a picture.
So it starts with a picture. It's actually the same picture the assessor has in his brief. You can see parking along what I'm going to call the front of the building, which is the west face. And then you've got parking along Dawn, which is the north face. So I want you to note that. You can also see the crane in the right-hand side of the photo, which was building the office building, which now completely obscures the view of this building from Osborne. Page 14 is an earlier photo, and you can see there's boulevard there. And the assessor said to me, essentially, do you have evidence that it's owned by the city of Winnipeg? And the answer is, yes, I have evidence, because I've done this property multiple times before. I know the owner entered into an agreement with the city of Winnipeg to lease that boulevard to allow it to be used for parking, because the parking on the property itself is badly underparked. There isn't enough. If we look at page 15, you can see the overhead photo with the parcel lines, and the parcel with the teardrop in it is the subject property. Immediately to the right of that, is what was at the time this photo was taken, a boulevard. But you can also see that it's outlined separately as a different property. And what I'm telling you is that it's owned by the city. And I will show you in a moment in the questionnaire, the annual rent that is paid by the owner to the city for the privilege of parking on that lot. And so we start with the proposition that when you start to rank properties, and I'm going to expand on this, because whenever we talk about capitalization rates, we're looking at a progression of properties. And generally speaking, the downtown properties, the downtown A office buildings are considered to be the best. And of the office buildings, they have the lowest capitalization rates. The downtown B buildings have many amenities as well, but they're considered to be a little bit back in terms of quality and number of amenities and those types of things. And so those tend to have a higher capitalization rate. And we see it in the assessor's chart of capitalization rates, where the A buildings get a 6% capitalization rate, both at the high and the low. And the B buildings get 6.75 across the board. Then we move to the suburban A and the suburban B. And for the city, the suburban A and the suburban B is 5.6 at the 20th percentile and 6.9 at the 80th percentile. There's no distinction made between an A and a B. And I'm going to show you now some photos that will assist you in that regard. While I'm on my way there, so I don't bounce you around too much, look at page 20 of my brief. You see the questionnaire. In the middle column, hopefully highlighted in yellow, is an expense of $1,355. That's the annual rent paid to the city of Winnipeg for the privilege of parking on the boulevard. That's something this building has to do because of its limited parking. And again, when you compare buildings that have more parking obviously don't have to do this. They are, I will suggest, a lesser risk. Then if we can jump to page 24. So this is 1661 Portage. I put it here only so you will understand. This is a suburban A office building. What makes it a suburban A office building? Well, the first thing is the size. This is a 10 or 11 story building. I frankly don't know how many square feet in the entire building, but that's not the point. When you look at page 25, so first of all, it's got a lobby. Lobbies aren't common in suburban office buildings. Not only does it have a lobby, it has a security desk. Again, typical of the downtown larger buildings, but very uncommon for suburban buildings, and that's why it's a suburban A building. When you look at the quality description, multi-zone climate control systems, again, the HVAC is better in a building of this type, 3 fast elevators, on-site manned security, free customer parking, big parking lot adjacent to it. So that's an example of an A building. A B building, and I'm not sure, I think it's on the cusp, frankly. The next one at page 26 is 1780 Wellington. That's known as the Airport Executive Center. It's beside the Hilton Hotel. It used to be the Radisson Hotel at the corner of Wellington and King Edward. If you look at page 27, you'll see they are describing it as a B-class building. And again, it's all about the size, the quality of the amenities, the number of amenities. Those are the things that distinguish buildings, again, on a relative ranking. And I'm taking a little bit of time to tell you this in this one, and I hopefully don't have to tell you again in the other ones, because one of the arguments I am making, and again, I appreciate the assessor's move on the capitalization rate up to 6.5%, but I say to you that this building, considering that it's a 1956 building that has been upgraded on the exterior to a 1977 building. So it's, it's an older building, certainly. The property, the land area is only 3,747 square feet, small. Parking is limited. The boulevard is utilized. The quality of the covenants, a building like this is going to attract small local business only. It's not going to attract national covenants, national tenants, international tenants the way the bigger buildings do. No elevator in a 2-story building is always a problem in terms of leasing a portion of the building. So all of that points to an increased capitalization rate. I used 7%. And I used 7% because when I look at the range of the suburban B buildings, recognizing what I said to you earlier about Colliers, and I better speak to that in a moment. But when I look at the broker rates for the B buildings, we are getting into the 7s. And so I selected a 7 for this one because of all the factors I just enumerated to you. And let me just again mention before I forget the Colliers thing, and I'm sure the panel has heard this before. And you know, the Colliers agents who appear here speak to this, so I'm not making this up. They include the closing costs, that increases the sale price, that decreases the capitalization rate, and they do so as a marketing tool. So I've picked 7%. Then if you turn to page 17 of my brief, so my gross potential income is a little bit different than the assessors. In part, it's because my square footage is a little bit different. I'm at 4,390 square feet. The assessor is at 4,520 rather. That difference of 130 square feet is the owner occupied space. The owner says it's 500 square feet. The assessor says it's 620 or 30 square feet. That's the difference in the square footage. I've used $13.50 a square foot for the owner occupied space. So our net operating income is really not that far apart. I have set the non-recoverable at 5%. I do that, and I don't want to belabor the non-recoverable issue. You've got a detailed submission from me. But I'll say to you simply, here's an example of a property that has to go and rent parking in order to make it work. That's typically an expense that you're not necessarily going to be able to recover. So I've increased the non-recoverable slightly. So at the end of the day, my net operating income is $55,126. The assessors is $58,119. So we are roughly $3,000 apart on the NOI. That's a decision you'll have to make. The assessor is now at 6.5 on the cap. I'm at 7. That's a decision you'll have to make. And I think I've told you as much as I can.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Kupfer, do you have any questions of Mr. Newman's evidence? Oh, you're on mute.
I do, thank you.
Thank you.
I guess starting with the square footage, do you have any proposal or explanation as to where the 130 square feet would have gone here for the owner occupied space?
Well, the only explanation I have is that the owner is in the questionnaire indicating 500 square feet, and the model is indicating 630 square feet for that space. So that's where the 130 square feet, that's where the difference is in the square footage.
Okay. No building plans or measurements or anything were done to substantiate it?
I have no doubt plans were done, but no, I don't have them here.
Okay. You mentioned that the building was set back off Osborne and made a point that this was different from many of the other offices. Can you tell me why that would make a difference in your mind, that an office building, not a retail building, obviously, but an office building is set back slightly off of Osborne?
Well, even with office buildings, there are signage opportunities. I think about the building I'm in at 360 Main. It's got a big TD logo plastered at the top of the building. The buildings around Portage and Main all have corporate logos plastered upon them. So it's a marketing opportunity that a building has for its tenants. In fact, the building at 360 Main actually has a pylon sign in front that lists a number of the large tenants, the law firms, the accounting firms. They're all listed on that pylon sign. So even in the big office buildings, marketing opportunities are important. This one doesn't have it.
Okay. The area that's being leased for parking, can you confirm how many parking spaces that is? It looks like 5 or 6.
Yeah, I would agree with that characterization.
Okay. Is the lease indefinite to be renewed at that amount long term? Do you know what the terms of it are?
So I have actually seen the lease. I've had my hands on it, but I couldn't locate it as I was doing this brief, but I have had it. I have confirmed it with the client. I don't remember whether it is on an indefinite term. I would rather doubt it, frankly, and I've no doubt the city will look for increases in the rent from time to time.
And it was negotiated between the owners, Fluid Development Corp, and the city. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Ms. McFadden?
I just have one, in regards to the parking, you've argued, if I'm understanding you correctly, that parking is one of the issues that is causing an increase in the cap rate, that would
A
affect.
contributing factor.
You've also argued, though, that the parking cost that they're paying is contributing to an increase in the non-recoverable. Do you not see that as double counting, Mr. Newman?
Well, I don't, in the sense that any building that has parking, whether it's on the property itself or, for example, in an adjacent underground lot like the buildings at Portage in Maine, they have an advantage in terms of attracting tenants. That helps the viability of the building, and that helps it in the marketplace generally, which is what the capitalization rate is all about.
Right.
The actual expense being incurred, that's just the cost of doing business. In some ways, it's no different than snow removal, for example. So I don't see them as, I see them as different rather.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
And thank you. I have no additional questions. So I think that concludes item number 1 on our agenda. So now we'll move to item number 3 on our agenda. I'll just give everybody a minute to get organized with that item. Okay, everybody ready? Mr. Kupfer, I'll ask you to begin item number 3, please. 584 St. Mary's Road.
It's file number 22-2053, roll number 08000478500, street address 584 St. Mary's Road. The new and current owner of the property is AC Manitoba Investments Limited. This is a commercial office building, 2 stories, constructed in 1951 with an effective age of 1970 and a leasable area of 2,016 square feet. We have a modeled 2023 assessment of $505,000, which I'm going to be recommending be maintained today. Page 2 of my brief shows an overhead view of the property and remarks on the post-reference sale. As we've discussed, property transacted June 4th, 2021. You can see an overhead view of the property here. As you can see, it stretches back quite a ways there, and it does have frontage onto St. Mary's Road. Page 3 of my brief has a Google view shot of it, so you can see the front of the building. Page 4 of my brief, I've supplied a rent comparables table. These are for our OFM properties or medical clinics. Oftentimes, these are fairly interchangeable with OFS type properties. It's kind of dependent on the usage. Generally speaking, medical clinics tend to be kept in fairly good condition. We tend to see slightly above average rents in relation to OFSs. And the averages that I pulled here, again, this is fairly citywide, tend to support that. I think our OFS average is in the mid $15, and this one's up a little over $16. Page 5 of my brief has the model breakdown of this premise. So like I said, 2,016 square feet of leasable area. It's being modeled at $16.20 a foot, which I think fits it right into the middle of that OFM range. All the other parameters are standard here, and the capitalization rate's being applied at 5.75%. Again, smaller space, good location, and that's what's giving us our model-driven value of $505,000. Given that this was a previously owner-occupied property, there's no income and expense information that I was able to pull from. That was prior to the reference date, which is why I've included the 2021 income and expense mailer. Of course, we're not relying on the rents in place, but I did want to show that this is it's being tenanted by MedNow Pharmacy, so that's why it's an OFM property, medical clinic. It's not vacant. Yeah, that's about all I have on it. So I will be recommending that $505,000 be maintained. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Newman, do you have any questions?
Right at the end, you made reference to it's occupied by a pharmacy, and that's why it's a medical clinic. Is every Shoppers Drug Mart in the city classified as OFM?
I don't know.
Aren't they classified as retail?
I don't know.
Well, I'm going to suggest to you they are, because I do a number of them. But you're not in a position to say?
No, I don't handle Shoppers Drug Mart properties.
But you're not in a position to say more generally, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, so let's look at your page 3. That's a photo of the building. It's a 2-story building, correct?
Correct.
No elevator, correct?
Correct.
You made mention that when you looked at your list of OFM rents, that frequently OFM and OFS are interchangeable. I think you said OFS might be mid-15, OFMs are mid-16, and therefore the 16 is supported because this is an OFM. Did I summarize correctly?
I thought I did it better, but that was okay.
Okay, fair observation. But I just want to be sure that I've not misstated or misunderstood. So again, I guess we'll have to agree to disagree on whether a pharmacy is an OFM building, but let's leave that aside for the moment. The capitalization rate of 5.75%. That's being driven by the fact that it's an OFM, isn't it?
Not just that. No, I would say also the fact that it's a smaller space, it's in a good location are contributing factors.
And in terms of its location, it's on St. Mary's Road. So what's so good about suburban St. Mary's Road?
Well, as you made the point in our last property, they have direct exposure onto the street, so they have opportunities for signage, advertising, and everything else that would go along with it and contribute it to being a positive thing.
Okay. And in terms of the quality of the building, you'd agree from the photo on page 3 that it's quite dated in its appearance?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I wouldn't remark on any significant renovations based on the exterior that I've looked at.
Okay. And again, your cap rate evidence, and I don't think you actually spoke to this, but your chart on page 7 is the extent of your evidence, correct?
That is all I've submitted regarding cap rates, correct?
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
One, have you visited this property, Nathan?
I haven't had the opportunity, no.
You haven't. Okay, so you can't talk to the nature of the finishings inside the building, the HVAC, the electrical, etc., as to whether 1951 or 1970.
Yeah, I can't personally speak to that, no, unfortunately. Regarding the mechanicals, it is a 1951 build. Regarding the finishes, the interiors, generally, you're going to operate as a pharmacy. It's got to at least be up to snuff. Nobody wants to go into an old, outdated pharmacy. So those are kind of the base assumptions that I would make.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden?
If I could just follow up on Mr. Newman's question to the assessor.
Sure.
This is a significantly lower cap rate than the last one we looked at. And you're saying that it's not entirely driven by the fact that it's categorized as a medical building. But it doesn't look all that different from the other building. I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on what else that might be based on.
No, that's absolutely a fair point. Both of the buildings that we've discussed haven't been, overly large or small. They've both been 2 stories, both originally constructed around the same time.
Age. Yep.
Yeah, given the same age, they've both been renovated. The only major differences I can see between these two, and again, this has all been derived by the model, is the location. Slight size difference in the fact that this is being operated and classified as an OFM rather than an OFS. That's about all I have to go on at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I have no questions for Mr. Newman. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're still dealing with Mr. Kupfer's evidence anyway.
Are we?
Yep. So
There
that's
you go.
okay.
I'm trying to move this along.
Mr. Kupfer, I'm just looking at some of your rent comparables. You said these are all OFMs. So looking at some of them, and just in terms of their location, would you see Main Street and Portage Avenue as equivalent to St. Mary's Road? What is equivalent to St. Mary's Road? There's a lot, so sorry.
And in fact, I mean, you can't even really say Main Street because there's some areas of Main Street that I would argue are going to rent for considerably higher than other areas of Main Street.
Yeah.
I just when you try and get too specific with it and try and find 1 or 2 comparables, I find you're more susceptible to these variations. I tried to provide a bigger sample size to kind of give you the bookends of that and everything in between. I don't have any specific apples to apples comparable for you here amongst the sample size that I've provided.
Okay. Would this list include such OFMs like Shoppers Drug Mart and that sort of place, or what OFMs? What are OFMs? Like, what do they encompass as a whole?
Yeah, so medical clinics. So they'll encompass a wider variety of things, including dental offices, any sort of therapeutic operation that generally get run out of smaller buildings. Like Mr. Newman has pointed out, a lot of these tend to be owner occupied. Somebody has to set up their own shop, their own clinic, their own whatever. And then it'll be categorized as an OFM. So most of the smaller ones that you would see on this list are probably in that type of situation.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I did say Shoppers Drug Marts, but I think you had indicated before that you weren't sure as to what their class codes were. So
yeah, I would have to double check on that. I can't give a solid answer one way or the other on Shoppers Drug Marts.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, that's all my questions. Mr. Newman?
So I'm going to cut to the heart of this.
Okay.
Capitalization rate is the issue.
Okay.
And let me just say that as part of my practice, I do a number of properties where Shoppers Drug Marts are found. I do freestanding Shoppers Drug Marts around the city. I do half a dozen of them. And I have never seen a Shoppers classified as an OFM. They are classified as retail, and appropriately so. I think the carry forward of the OFM designation on this property is historic. And Mr. Whitbread, to address to some extent the questions you were asking about mechanical and electrical and that type of thing, this used to be a dentist office. And the reason I know it used to be a dentist office is through the magic of Google Street View and the historic photos you can look at. The signage on the building was quite prominent about the dentist, having been there for a good number of years. So I would say to you that I suspect the ventilation, for example, and the systems in that building, at least in part of the building, were pretty reasonable in order to accommodate a dental shop. Of course, that might be a little bit overkill for purposes of a pharmacy. And indeed, if you think about a Shoppers you've ever been in, and you probably don't spend much time looking at the floor or the ceiling, but if you think about the floor, The floor is essentially what we used to call tiles, vinyl tiles. And maybe it's chic linoleum now, but it's that type of product. And the ceilings are acoustic tile, you know, just like here. And you've got different forms of acoustic tile. So, you know, Shoppers Drug Marts aren't overly fancy in terms of their finish. And yes, they'll be kept clean without question. But ultimately, it's all about presenting the inventory. So I come back. The carryover is from an OFM is historic. In my view, it's not an OFM any longer. This is an older building. There's nothing very nice about it. It's pretty nondescript. And so I'm suggesting the capitalization rate needs to be higher. And ultimately what I've done, again, and I've looked at the spectrum, and I don't want to repeat everything I just told you, but you know, considering the quality of this building, and in fact, on page 13 of my brief, I've got a little bit of a closer in photo, so you can see the building, I've ended up selecting a 7% capitalization rate. Again, no elevator, devalues the second floor, I would suggest. You know, we've used a single rental rate of $16 and plus on the entirety of the building. I think the $16 rate is too high. I think it's pulled from OFMs. And as the assessor said, you know, they're interchangeable sometimes. The mid 15 is more like the OFS. The mid 16 is the OFM. Well, I think this one would have been better as a mid 15 and not a mid 16. But I've left the rent alone. And because I'm leaving the rent alone, that's why I say to you that the capitalization rate of 7% is reasonable. I could have moved the rents around and then arguably had somewhat of a lesser capitalization rate. But again, this is an old building in terms of appearance. There's nothing particularly attractive about it. So using the assessor rents of $16.19, I think the cap rate of 7% is appropriate. I put 5% into my non-recoverables. I don't want to make a big deal out of that, frankly. In small buildings like this, whether it's 3% or 5%, it really doesn't matter very much. So the panel will do whatever it wants to do in that regard. My value is $405,923. If you move that up a little bit because you go with 3% on non-recoverable, that's fine. I don't have any difficulty with that. But essentially, this is all about cap rate. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Kupfer, do you have any questions?
I do, thank you. So like I stated, I've never been inside this building. Obviously, I've been inside of a Shoppers Drug Mart, which I think we would all agree is 90 to 95% retail with a pharmacy at the back. So is this a 90% retail operation with a pharmacy at the back, or is this primarily a pharmacy?
I've not been in it either, but I would say to you, it's going to be primarily a pharmacy. There's not enough room for significant retail.
Okay. You've stated that this is not a nice building, but you have not been inside of it. Is that correct?
Yes, but from the exterior, nondescript, I called it.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden?
I do not.
Okay. Okay, and I have no additional questions either.
I'm not going to turn the floor.
Okay.
We're rolling.
We'll just give everybody a minute to pull up item number 4.
Good idea. That we want to talk about.
Okay, we'll now begin with item number 4, 1817 Corridon Avenue. So Mr. Kupfer, whenever you're ready.
It's file number 22-3314, roll number 1209-776-1100, street address 1817 Corridon Avenue. This is a newly constructed commercial office building. We have it added to the roll here for 2021. It's all on one story, the leasable area of 4,166 square feet. And we have a 2023 modeled assessment of $1,435,000 that I'll be recommending be maintained today. Page 2 of my brief shows an overhead view of the building. So you can see there's parking included along the back there. We have subject sale history in 2015 for $620,000, which I believe would have been for the land or for the old building, and then to be demolished for the new building to be constructed. Page 4 of my brief, or sorry, page 3 of the brief has the Google Street View there, so you can get a view of what it looks like from the ground floor. It's kind of curved there along Corridon. Included our OFS rent comparable tables here, the same one that you've seen throughout the day. Page 8 of my brief has the model value workup. So this building is separated into, or demised into two spaces, 2,520 square feet and 1,646 square feet for that total, 4,166. This is all model driven. I haven't made any adjustments here, so these parameters are being pulled from our model. Page 9 of the brief has the income value summary, again showing the estimated market value. I've included the sales brochure here. So this was for lease. So again, this gives you an idea of the condition of the building. It shows the demise here between the two different spaces, one already being leased and one they're asking to be leased. Confirms our square footages, includes asking rates, which obviously we don't put any value on. Shows that there's 19 parking stalls, and like I said, gives you some additional photos. That's why I've included that. And then I've included the 2021 income and expense mailer, which I'm going to push back on here because one of the two leases was signed January 1st, 2021, 3 months before our reference date, and in my opinion, is a fair representation of the space and should be included. And that was for the 2,552 square foot space. So the lease that is in place that was signed prior to the reference date does support our assessment. Obviously, we don't have one that we can use for the other space as it was signed afterwards. So based on all that, I am recommending that our model assessment be maintained today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Newman?
So so the assessment proposed, help me here, front page says $1,435,000, page 1, correct?
Correct.
Now let's jump to page 8. And it says $1,475,000.
Correct.
I know what the original assessment looks like because it's part of my material. And the average rent was $20.73 a square foot. And under what appears on page 8, the average rent is now $21.30 a square foot. So did you change that? Did the model change that? How did the value change from what's on the cover page of your brief to page 8?
Well, I haven't changed that. I would suggest that given that it's a new building, something was entered or entered by two different people that could have messed that up.
Okay.
The value under appeal, I believe, is $1,435,000, and that's what I'm recommending today.
All right, thank you. So then we have the capitalization rate of 5.35%. And again, that's the issue in this case. So your chart on page 10, 5.35% is below the 20th percentile. Aside from the fact that it's new, is there any other reason why the capitalization rate is so low?
I would suggest the location on Corridon is one of the better ones. I said I'd suggest that the location on Corden is one of the better ones.
Yes. Okay. Is the size contributing to it again? The concept that smaller buildings, smaller square footage bring a lesser rate, a lesser cap rate?
I can't really speak to what effect that would have. I wouldn't call this a small building. It's just over 4,000 square feet. So, you know, I would say it's probably near the average of our sample size that I've given.
Okay. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
I have nothing, thanks.
Ms. McFadden?
I don't have any questions, no.
Okay, so I had the same observation as Mr. Newman when I was going through the brief. So the workup you've provided us then, Mr. Kupfer, on page 6, we can't look to it for your to reach your recommended assessment of 14 or 1,435,000. Is that correct?
That's correct. That workup derives a higher value.
Right. So can you tell me then in your brief, what the NOI and the cap rate is for your,
I believe, well, with the existing NOI that I have there and a 5.5% cap rate even, that gives you a value of 1,435,000. So that may have been the change that happened. It wasn't me who made it, so I can't say specifically.
Excuse me, I thought the rent was mentioned as being different.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
but I'm just trying to,
Want me-
we'll get to yours.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I do see that the math does work with a different NOI, so obviously, and a different cap.
You can make the math work either way, but my best guess would be it would have been originally at 5.5% cap in that model NOI, and maybe that's where it came from.
Okay. All right. Well, Mr. Newman has indicated that his brief can help explain this, so we'll go to Mr. Newman's brief then.
So if you go to page 13, you'll see the original assessment at the 1,435,000.
Okay.
As I pulled it off the city website.
So it did have a 5.35.
Yeah, got it.
Cap has not changed.
No, it's a rent that's changed.
And again, as I said, as I asked Mr. Kupfer, you can see that the potential income in the original workup I pulled offline is 86,366, which averages to $20.73. And on his page 8, it becomes 88,752, which then averages to $21.30. So that's why there's a difference in the NOI ultimately. And as I think it's been observed, if you take so that's why the revised NOI in his brief with a 5.5 gets you to the same 1,435,000 as the slightly lower NOI in the original assessment. So again, my issue is the capitalization rate. And again, I appreciate it's a newer building. But when we get to 5.35, we are into the capitalization rates for multifamily, which have historically always been lower than commercial capitalization rates in a general sense, because it's always believed there's less risk with residential multifamily than there is with commercial. It's a new building, obviously, we can all see that. The only observation I make to you is simply because it's new doesn't mean it's without risk. Directly across the street from this site is another shopping center, and this is referred to in my submissions, is another shopping center which now has as the tenant fronting on Corden, a Pilates facility, I believe, called Fitual. But before that, it was a restaurant called Burmax, which had a rather public and not so glorious demise, and for its owners as well. But the only reason I mention that is because, yes, I understand where the location is, but there is turnover, is the point I'm making. There is still risk associated with real estate, that's just reality. And so what I ultimately did, if you look to my page 14, I used a 6.75% capitalization rate. I recognize the newness in the location somewhat. So I brought it down a bit to 6.75%. I left the non-recoverable at 3% on this property, again, because it's new. And so that derives a value of $1,136,000. So I use the original assessment NOI. So my numbers tracked right to the NOI are the original assessment. And the only thing I've changed is the cap rate, bringing it to 6.75%. And again, I just say to you, look at the broker's chart, look where the cap rates are. There's nothing anywhere in a 5.35% range. As I say, when we get there, we're getting into multifamily capitalization rates, and that's not appropriate for a commercial property. Those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Kupfer, do you have any questions?
I do. I would like a bit more explanation as to your justification for the cap rate, just because it doesn't seem consistent with the other properties that we've been dealing with. I feel like you've been suggesting 7% cap rates for office buildings that were constructed in the 1950s. How can a new office building on Corridon be at a 6.75% cap rate?
Because I don't think the key to everything is the age. Capitalization rates are about risk. Commercial real estate brings with it risk. We've just been through COVID. How many businesses failed through COVID? How many of them needed support? And I didn't go into any of this, but it's all in my brief, the COVID story. How many tenants needed help through COVID? In how many circumstances did landlords have to give up rent? So it's not just about location, it's about the risk that's associated with commercial real estate. And that's why I think the rate needs to be higher. And that bluntly is supported by the broker's chart, which shows the rates. And again, acknowledging what I've said about Colliers and their understatement, that's why it shows the broker's rates up at 7 to 7.75. Cushman is at 6.75 at the low end. So that's why I've gone to 6.75. It's not simply the age.
Now, regarding the tenants, Sucker Punch Creative were in agreement that the lease was signed prior to the reference date and that the rent represents the space.
The rent represents the space with the inducements included.
Which inducements?
Well, it's common, as I think you'll understand, that new tenants get allowances from landlords when they move into space.
You're saying that there were tenant inducements here?
There were, but I can't give you the specific number.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden?
I have no question.
Okay. All right, can we just perhaps take about a 5 to 10 minute break, maybe 10 minutes?
Thank you.
We'll resume, let's say at, well, it's 2:13. Let's resume at 2:25.
Yes.
Thank you. I did notice it was different, yeah. Maybe because it was you. Like they kept all your properties together.
That could be.
Yeah.
Although I do have a docket of service parking lots.
That would be a limit.
Thank you. I'd like to call the meeting back to order. We're now going to deal with item number 7 on our, or 5 on our agenda, 330 Donald Street. So Mr. Kupfer, when you're ready, please. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay.
File number 22-2798, roll number 1305 2306500, street address 330 Donald Street. The owner is Donald Properties Limited. This is a commercial surface parking lot. The land area is 18,173 square feet, and we have a modeled 2023 assessment of $1,685,000, which equates to $92.72 a foot. We'll be recommending today. The property transacted most recently in August of 2021, so we have a new ownership group. Page 2 of the brief shows the overhead view of the surface parking lot, as you can see. And page 3 has that Google Street View photo from the street. The value that's being derived here is being modeled at land value. So what that means is we'll have a parking stream, and we'll have essentially our land value comparables. The highest and best use is whatever the highest value will come out to in our model. In this case, it's land value. So that's why I've supplied land comparables here. We're not defending it based on the income stream. We're saying that the highest and best use is as vacant land, and I believe that is well supported by my comparables. I provided a map showing the proximity of the comparables just past page 3 there. You can see the subject property on the corner of Ellis and Donald Street. Comparables 5 and 6 are actually located in the same block. So you can see comparable 6 fronts onto Portage there, while comparable 5 fronts onto Hargrave. The other comparables are slightly more spread out. I provided you with a good range of properties, so you can see properties that are a bit smaller as well as larger. In virtually all cases, they support our assessed value. So I've supplied the income and expense mailer. As always, again, it's a parking lot, so they have parking income attributed to it. And yeah, that's all the information I have. So at this time, we're going to recommend that 2023 modeled assessment be maintained. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Newman, do you have any questions?
I do. So you acknowledge, Mr. Kupfer, that this parking lot or this property has been used as a parking lot for decades?
I don't know how long it's been used as a parking lot.
Okay. You indicate that a highest and best use analysis is done, and whatever generates the highest value is then used. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Can you tell me about the highest and best use analysis that was done? What went into it?
Well, generally, a highest and best use analysis considers what is physically possible. See if I can get this right. Physically possible, legally permissible, reasonably profitable, marketably and financially feasible, and maximally productive. So essentially, we're saying as long as this can be developed in the same way, and as far as I know, it can be based on the zoning. I think it's the same zoning as all of my comparables, and it produces a higher value, then that would be the highest and best use attributed by the model.
Okay, so let's look at your page, I think it's page 3, the map of your comparables.
Yes.
So let's just talk about your comparables. So let's start with comparable number 3. That has a value of $96.98 a square foot. That's the site, the present site of True North Square, isn't it?
It is.
So that was part of a land assembly for a redevelopment of that area, correct?
Yeah, that wouldn't include the whole area, but that would be one of the sales that would contribute to that.
Then your comparable number 6, that's $207 a square foot. That's the site of a redevelopment where the Alt Hotel and Brown's Restaurant and the Merchant Kitchen are all found, correct?
That's correct.
So also a land assembly for redevelopment. Agreed?
I hadn't verified if that was the entire parcel or only part of the parcel.
Okay. And that's actually in the same block as the subject, except at Portage, whereas the subject is at Ellis.
Correct.
Comparable number 5, which has a value of $203 a square foot. That's the apartment condominium building known as the Glass House, isn't it?
It is.
So again, redevelopment. And then the rest of that block to the north of the Glass House, running all the way to Ellis, was redeveloped with a multi-floor parking structure, correct?
There is a parking structure there.
And then comparable number 4, 245 Graham, that has a sale price of $194. That's the site right opposite what used to be the post office, now the police station, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And that was to be some very large multi-family condominium type development, but ultimately that didn't go anywhere, and there were suggestions of fraud on the part of the developers, correct?
You sound like you know more about that than I do.
Okay. So just these comparables, your 4, 5, and 6, all appear to me to be part of, in fact, your comparable number 3 as well, all appear to be part of land assembly for redevelopment purposes, or in the case of comparable number 4, a failed land assembly. Do you agree?
I don't have enough information to agree on that, no.
Okay. Now, do you agree with me in a general sense that if we make a distinction between the north side of Portage and streets to the north and streets to the south of Portage, that as we go to the north side of Portage, things get a little rougher, a little more run down? Do we agree with that?
I would say potentially in some areas.
And do you agree that on the southeast corner of Ellis and Donald, so right across the street from the subject property, in other words, is the former Masonic temple, which at one time was also a Mother Tucker's restaurant, that has been vacant and empty probably for 10 years, trying to do something there. Do you agree?
I haven't researched that property at all.
Okay. And I ask all of this in the context of the highest and best use, because the assumption is being made that this land could easily be sold for development purposes, and that would bring a higher value than it would as a parking lot. But I'm not sure that's the case, considering all the redevelopment that has already occurred in downtown Winnipeg and where it's occurred. Do you have any comment or observation on that?
Given the zoning, the size, and the location, I don't see why this couldn't be developed in any similar way to the comparables. Generally speaking, these are very good investment properties because they return more than what you're spending on expenses on them and continue to appreciate in value, as you would expect downtown property to do.
Okay. Well, I wish everyone was that buoyant on downtown Winnipeg, but okay. And obviously you're aware of, you've got the parking, or the questionnaire rather, which reflects the parking revenues. So we understand that, and we understand that, do we agree generally that parking lots in downtown Winnipeg have suffered through COVID and have seen a significant decline in their revenues?
I don't know enough about it to say significant, but I would say it stands to reason that throughout COVID, as people were working from home, less people were parking downtown.
Okay, that's fair. As part of your brief, the last 2 pages are the COVID questionnaire from 2020. And you'll note the comments by the owner in boxes 9 and 10, and particularly in box 9, about parkers being on a month-to-month. Many have discontinued because working from home. About 20, the impact is large decrease in revenue. Also 15 daily parking spots, which are down significantly in revenue. You don't dispute any of that, do you?
No, I don't have any reason to dispute the self-reported information on the COVID questionnaire.
All right, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Noonan. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. So if I look at your land comparable chart on page 3, and I'm looking at the sales that go back to 2013, 2014, 2015, are these sale numbers adjusted for time?
There's no adjustment to the time. So this is the sale price and sworn value at the time of sale.
So when I read $207.73 a square foot in 2013, that is what it was. And yet you've come up with or your model, sorry, has come up with a 92.72, which is less than half of that. Can you explain that to me so I understand this?
All of that is correct. I'm not sure I have a great explanation for you as to why this one would be different in that regard. Certainly with downtown property, when it comes to redevelopment, there are circumstances involved in that. As Mr. Newman has pointed out, I believe some of these may have been involved in redevelopment packages. You know, you buy this extra piece and then all of a sudden you can build a bigger building. Beyond that, all I see is that our value is supported by the comparables that are given. We're not chasing any form of increase or anything like that. But I do believe, especially given what Mr. Newman has stated about the reduction in parking demand, that the highest and best use for redevelopment is likely for this property.
And then maybe you could help me understand a little bit about a sale about a year ago for $2.4 million against the market value of 1.685 for tax purposes.
Mr. Whitbread, that sale is a post-reference sale.
I just realized that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah,
sorry,
thank you.
I withdraw the question.
No,
Thank you.
that's my mistake. I apologize.
No,
Yeah.
no worries. No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden, do you have any questions?
I have no further questions, no.
Okay, and I have no questions either. Mr. Newman.
I'm sitting here and look, I recognize there's nothing I can do about this, but this is why I asked the assessor to redact. They redact all the time. I see black bands through information all the time. And this is the problem with what happens with this. Having said that, I won't belabor it. So I have been doing this parking lot and other parking lots in the downtown area for years. We all know what has happened to parking lots in downtown Winnipeg. We know what has happened to the population of workers in downtown Winnipeg. It has substantially diminished. In my brief, there is a report from the Downtown Biz Association on the problems that downtown Winnipeg is facing and how much of the population has not returned to downtown. And so obviously parking revenues are going to be down significantly. Are they going to be down forever? I guess we don't know for sure. But I think a lot of people believe that the world has changed forever in the sense of people working from home. That a lot of people don't want to have to come downtown. They don't want to have to pay for parking. They don't want to have to get dressed up. They're happy to be home. And It's just the way it is. So, and the reason I asked about the highest and best use analysis is, sure, it's legally permissible, and sure, it's physically possible. And I don't know if it would be maximally productive. And I don't know if it would be financially feasible, considering today's construction costs, to build a building there and try and lease it out. Is the demand there, in other words? And I think what anybody would do before they would jump into this, they would do a market study. Does the market tell them there is a demand for development on this site? And a lot of development has occurred in the surrounding area. The assessor's brief actually on page 3, and I'm not asking you to turn there, but it's got a good photo of the subject property, and it's got the parking structure on Hargrave behind it. You can see the glass house, but there was an adjacent office building, an old office building beside it. Nobody bought it up. Nobody bought up the subject parking lot when the Alt Hotel and those restaurants were developed. Nobody bought them up when the parking structure behind was done or when the glass house was done. And certainly I'll suggest to you, the focus of development in downtown Winnipeg is south of Portage, and look at True North Square and the new Wawanesa Insurance Tower under construction, and the Sutton Place Hotel maybe one day to be finished in terms of construction opposite the convention center. So I'm not sure there truly is a demand for redevelopment of this site, which would say it should be land value. But even then, is the land value right? So look at my page. Look at my page 11. Here are a variety of sales in what I'm going to call generally the downtown Winnipeg area. Some of them are the same as the assessors. Some of them are not. But a lot of these sales were part of sales for other purposes as part of redevelopment, as part of that type of thing. And it goes over onto the second page. You know, when you see sales in the 50s, 219 Main, and that's Main at the top of St. Mary's Avenue. Down the street from Earl's, you see sales on Colony. This site is not in the heart of what I would call a redevelopment area. And to rely on these comparables that we've been through, that by and large were for purposes of redevelopment and were land assemblies or wannabe developments in the case of the site opposite the post office police station, I think these are the wrong comps. So you have a choice. You can use an income approach, or you can use a land value approach. And so what I tell you in my brief is that COVID has had a significant impact. The 2020 assessment was resolved at $1,685,000. I don't know if it's a coincidence that the 2023 assessment is the same value. Seems like a funny coincidence to me, but maybe. I tell you in my brief that, look at page 3 of the text, the Downtown Biz Report, 70,000 people worked in downtown Winnipeg pre-pandemic. In March of 21, only 20% were back full-time. Parking statistics, 50% decrease in on-street paid parking demand, says the Winnipeg Parking Authority. Transit ridership down 60%. 82% of storefront businesses report a drop in revenue. Downtown isn't safe. People don't want to come back to work. The Bay Store closed, and the Winnipeg Jets are no longer the hot ticket they once were. So the historic demand for parking isn't there. Who knows whether it's ever going to return? The location of the subject property, I've said a bit of this already. The significant demand generators for parking are office buildings. Those office buildings are generally some distance from the subject property at the corner of Portage and Main or in the Smith-Donald corridors, I'll suggest, but not along Ellis. Ellis is not Main Street for redevelopment of anything. So I've given you the questionnaires, the income and expense questionnaires for this property. And you can see on page 5 of my brief, I've taken 2019, I've taken 2020. Remember, 2020 had 2.5 months before COVID really hit, January, February, and part of March. So that the revenue will be impacted. There you see the bottom line. It went from $93,000 in 19 to $36,000 in 2020. I've taken an average. If you're prepared to do it on an income approach, I've used an average of the 2 years. Frankly, I think that might be generous because I suspect that 2021 has not been any better than 2020. But that's what I've done. And now we get to the question of the capitalization rate. So historically, surface parking lots downtown had a 6, then a 6 became a 5, then a 5 became a 4.5. But the city has no transactions to base a 4.5 on. So I'm giving you the options of using 4.5 and the value becomes $1,442,000, or 5 and the value becomes $1,298,000. It's a big difference in value, and obviously you could go in between as well. But I think parking lots, if that's how we're going to value this, continue to be a high risk. Then in terms of land value, and I'll come back to my chart in a moment. So there's a range of values from $20 at the low end to $194 at the high end. The average price was $74.63 a square foot. The median is $66.97. Many of these properties were acquired for a specific project for development purposes. North of Donald, on Donald, north of Portage, as I've said already, rougher area, as I've said already. I suggest 219 Main might be the most relevant sale, only because it's on a major thoroughfare and it's not in the heart of downtown and influenced. At the end of the day, I picked $75 a square foot on a land value. That's $1,362,000. So you've got $1,362,000 as land. You got $1,298,000 to $1,442,000 using the average of the 2 years. I suggest $1,326,000, which is essentially the midpoint between these values. What then follows are the income and expense questionnaires for 2020 and 2019. So you can see the actual numbers. And then again, there's my chart and there's the state of downtown report from Downtown Biz. So subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Kupfer, do you have any questions?
Yes, please. So I want to confirm your statement here. So the 2020 assessment was proposed at $1,928,000. So that was modeled for 2020 and confirmed at the board revision. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then the $1,685,000 was settled at the municipal board with the assessor at the time for 2020.
Yes.
And then that $1,685,000 appears to have been inappropriately carried over to the 2023 assessment, correct?
Did you say appropriately or inappropriately?
Inappropriately.
Well, I don't know whether it's appropriate or inappropriate. I just made the observation that maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not, that it's the same number.
Okay. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Whitbread.
I have none, thank you.
Ms. McFadden.
I have no question.
Okay, just following up on some of the comments you said, Mr. Newman, about land values north and south of Portage. On your comps, can you point out which ones are south of Portage? Or north of Portage, sorry, north.
So not many, I'll start with.
Yeah.
And that's why I ended up telling you that I think the best comparable is actually the 219 main sale, because it's not in the heart. Technically, the Spence sale, no, actually, I don't even think it's I don't think any of them are north of Portage, now that I look at it, which is telling.
219 Main Street is quite a bit smaller.
Yeah.
Also. It was also a development sale by the looks of your notes.
It was a wannabe development that never came to be.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'm just going through them because there's a lot,
Yes,
so I'm just going through. And some of these are fairly old as well, I note, back
I
from
agree.
2012, and they're not time adjusted.
they are not.
Okay. Okay, I have no additional questions. Okay, give us a minute. That completes item number 5. Whoops. Now move to item number 6 on our agenda, which is 840 McLeod Avenue. So Mr. Kupfer, when you're ready, please.
That is file number 22-2152, roll number 0400275720, street address 840 McLeod Avenue. This is a commercial office property constructed in 1982. It's only 1 story. It has a leasable area of 7,400 square feet, and I believe that is tenanted. We have a modeled assessment of $1,516,000, which I'll be recommending be maintained today. Scrolling to page 2 of my brief, you can get an overhead view of the subject and see the sales history. I believe that 2007 sale would have been encompassing another property. I can't imagine it would have been just for this one, so I wouldn't put weight on that for our analysis today. Page 3 of the brief shows a Google Street View taken from McLeod Avenue, showing the building. It's an OFS, so I've included our OFS table. Page 8 of my brief has the subject property workup. Again, 7,400 square feet of leasable area. The model's assigned a rent of $14.57 a foot. All the other parameters are being derived by the model. I haven't made any adjustments here. That's giving us our value of $1,516,000. We do have income and expense information for the property. They submitted for 836 and 840 McLeod together here. But if you scroll down, it shows Wasso Inc. is the tenant there for 840. Looks like they've been in the space since 2005. Their current lease is running from 2020 to 2030. And they have a net lease rate in place of $13.65. So about 90 cents lower than what we have currently modeled. Find to be quite reasonable. So I'm going to recommend that that modeled assessment be maintained at $1,516,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Newman, do you have any questions?
That's huge. So McLeod, where is McLeod exactly? What does it run off?
Let's get you a good idea here. So the subject property is just removed from Gateway Road. Oh, Gateway and McLeod here.
Okay, thank you. And Gateway runs north-south, and this property will be on the east side of Gateway, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And 7,400 square feet, so for a suburban office building, it is on the larger side, correct?
Correct.
And you've got a lot of comps. And are these the same comps as we've seen on the other properties?
Yes.
Okay. So again, many of them are on major thoroughfares. Would you agree that McLeod is a a street that has lesser traffic than, for example, Waverly or Donald or Corden, somewhat quieter.
Yeah, I would consider it an intermediate or lower thoroughfare.
Okay. And, you know, again, just looking at your list of comparables, I tried to look for size. And so I see comparable 12, for example, 12,000 square feet, larger than the subject, I acknowledge, at $13.50. I see comparable 17, which I suspect is the subject, at 7,400 square feet.
1365, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I see comparable 24 on Corden, 8,429 square feet. That's a multi-story, relatively new office building at the corner of Corden and Harold, correct?
Correct.
Then we've got 1150 Waverly, again, 7,280 square feet, so similar size. But that's located in the south part of the city. That's a multi-story office building, is it not?
I believe so.
And then if we look to your comparable 60, again, there's size, 9,640 square feet at $13.50. Comparable 63, actually 62 on Sargent, 5,180 feet, $11.63, 6,971 square feet, $12, 72, 5,437 square feet, $10. I guess the point I want to make is that you agree with me with the principle of economies of scale, and that as space gets larger, the rent per square foot comes down.
Generally speaking, that's true. Yes.
All right. So this is a 1982 building with an effective age still of 1982, so no upgrading, correct?
None on record. Nope.
Okay. And so now looking at page 8, we have a larger building with a 1980 age, no upgrading, with a capitalization rate of 6.25%. And your capitalization rate evidence, again, is going to be the broker charts on page 10. Correct?
Correct.
Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Whitbread, do you have any questions?
I don't think so.
Ms. Ms. McFadden?
No, I haven't.
Okay. I don't have any additional questions either. So, Mr. Neufeld.
Aha, you did it.
Newman, I did it.
And I was just like,
I know.
that's what.
My apologies. Mr. Newman, go ahead.
Because Ron Merritt does that all the time.
Oh, you may get it sometimes, yeah. Everybody's name.
Okay, so I am taking issue with the rent here. And again, part of the problem is, and I obviously don't have access to all the information the assessor does, although I do note with interest the chart here, and it's a good source of information. But I think what the chart shows us, the assessor's comparables, is as you get bigger, not surprisingly, the rate per square foot comes down. And I think ultimately, when we look at generally at the larger spaces the assessor has used, I don't think they support $14.57 a square foot. The rent of $13.65 is put in place in 2020 as part of a renewal. I think it's a reasonable reflection of market. and I'm going to ask you ultimately to use it. The other issue, of course, we again have is the capitalization rate. And again, I'm not going to belabor this, but we have the broker's charts. There's nothing in the broker's charts that's bringing buildings down as low as 6.25%, recognizing the Collier's methodology. If you look at page 10 of my brief, you'll see there a comparison between the assessor low and high for suburban B and what the brokers are showing as low high for suburban B. And again, I don't think this building is truly a suburban B. It's what I would call a miscellaneous building, like the rest of the buildings we've been doing here today, for the reasons I outlined at the outset. Amenities, size, quality, those types of things. But I think at the end of the day, the capitalization rate needs to come up. And again, it's in a part of town where the rents generally are not as high. South Winnipeg rents tend to be higher. I've selected a capitalization rate of 7% for this property. And again, recognizing where the broker's rates are falling rather, and recognizing the attributes of the property. And again, really what it comes down to is there's a progression of capitalization rates, and I think the model is putting it too low at 6.25%. That is my submission.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Cupfer, do you have any questions?
I just want to point out that we've got no photos again. Have you been inside this property, Mr. Newman?
I have not.
Haven't? Okay. That's my only question. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread.
And I have none, thanks.
Ms. McFadden.
I have no questions, thank you.
Okay. And I have no questions. Now move to the last property on our agenda, item number 7. 6010 Roblin Boulevard. So Mr. Kupfer, whenever you're ready, please.
That's file number 22-2042, roll number 01004154154100, street address 6010 Roblin Boulevard. This is a commercial office building, only one story, constructed in 1980. We have leasable space of 5,050 square feet and a 2023 model assessment of $1,129,000 using the income value, which we will be recommending today. Page 2 of my brief shows no subject sale history for the property. You can get an overhead view of the property. You can see it's on the corner there, Roblin Boulevard. Page 3 of my brief has a photo taken from the Google Street View of Roblin Boulevard. Page 4, I've provided the same OFM table that I had for a previous property. Obviously, you've seen my OFS table at this point. You're aware of what our average rates are. I haven't made any changes specific for this property. We do have this classified as a medical clinic. It is a primary, well, 2 tenants. There's a dental office and there's an accountant. So the dental office, I believe here is the A1 high quality finish, and then the C2, the standard finish for the accountant office. This is again all being modeled. Haven't tinkered with any of these numbers. Page 6 again has the income value summary, deriving that $1,129,000. Page 7 and 8 here show the capitalization rate tables, and then we get onto our income and expense information. Both of these tenants appear to be arm's length net leases, so we have good information to go off of here. I'm sure Mr. Newman will be able to fill us in. I'm showing that the contact person and the president is M. Newman. I'm not sure if that's in relation. The dental clinic, let's have a look here. showing is renting at $19.75 a foot net, and the accountant at $16 a foot net. So both a bit higher than what we have modeled. They are indicated to be net leases, so I believe our NOI again is quite reasonable for this property. We're really just looking at the cap rate here, which I think is coming in at 6.1%. Again, probably a bit on the lower end for our 1980s office buildings, but that's where we're at. So at this time, I'm going to maintain that 2023 assessment be recommended today, $1,129,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupfer. Mr. Newman, do you have any questions?
So right at the end, you said, suggested the issue is really the capitalization rate, and at 6.1, it's coming in a bit lower. Is there a recommendation you would make in terms of an adjustment to the cap rate?
My recommendation would probably be 6.5% for this property. Given what I've seen of the rents, they appear to be modeled on the lower end already. So that's why I said that this would likely be the only issue.
Is that a verbal recommendation, Mr. Kupfer?
Yeah, I'm okay making that as a recommendation.
So can you repeat the value that comes out at?
That would be 68,884,000 is the NOI. With a 6.5% cap rate would be 1,060,000 rounded.
1060.
Correct.
Mr. Newman, what do you think of that number?
I think it's getting warmer, but I don't think it's quite there yet. But thank you, I appreciate that.
Okay. All right.
So, and just to dispel any uncertainty, the M. Newman referred to as the contact person is me.
Oh, okay.
So I understand this building. Obviously, this is a building that my late father bought many years ago, and so I'm quite familiar with it. It's got a couple of issues. Almost every building has issues of some kind. They're not all perfect. This one doesn't have enough parking. We have to rent parking across the street. The Royal Canadian Legion that has the tank in front of it on Robland is right across the street. And fortunately, parking can be rented across the street, but there's an extra cost to that. And that's one of the deficiencies, unfortunately, of the property. It's just what it is. So if you look at my brief, and let me say to you generally that buildings in Charleswood, regrettably, they frequently have vacancy. And, you know, I've watched it over the years. I've watched other buildings. This building has had significant vacancy issues from time to time. I give you a little bit of history. The Robland Dental Center has actually been there for a long time. And then the Manitoba Veterinary Medical Association was there, but they gave notice that they were leaving. And so by August of 12, they were gone. And for the next 3 or 4 years, sort of periodic month-to-month tenants could only be found. And then finally in 2017, the accounting firm came along and they took the space. They took it initially at $14 and then it stepped up to $16. But they got an improvement allowance and they got free rent. And the dentist got an improvement allowance and the dentist got free rent. And so there's a cost to bringing these tenants into place. I've given you at page 3 of my brief a variety of comparables from buildings in downtown Charleswood. You can see the rates for what in a general sense are professional offices in that area, in that part of the city. Rents tend not to be as high in that part of the city as in other areas, but you can see the rents range from $13 to $14.75. I've selected a rate of $14.25 for this property based on these comparables. At page 4, I tell you about the history of vacancy in the Charleswood area generally, and again, it tends to be significant from time to time. Thankfully, the subject property is not presently vacant, but it has had issues. Then we get to the capitalization rate, of course, and again, we get to the same thing that I've been telling you all along. And I appreciate the recognition by the assessor, by the increase in the cap rate to 6.5%. I'm looking for a capitalization rate of 7%. Again, it's a 40-year-old building, and it's actually had some structural issues over the years. It's got a floating slab, and like many buildings that have floating slabs, as it rains, the clay tends to expand and it tends to push against walls. Engineers have had to look at it from time to time over the years. So it's not perfect, but again, my suggestion is if you look at page 17, I've used a $14.25 rate, and that creates a bit of a difference ultimately in the NOI. I've also used the 5% on the non-recoverables. In part, that's about the parking. But we have a difference in our NOI at the end of the day of about $6,500. And of course, we have a difference in the capitalization rate as well. I just observed that the 2020 capitalization rate was 7.55%, and it's dropped to 6.1. That's a pretty aggressive drop. And again, the assessors recognize that partially by the 6.5 recommendation on the cap, but that's an aggressive drop. And, you know, the property is going up substantially in value. The 2020 value is $805,000. Even at $1,060,000, it's going up $260,000, which is more than a 25% increase, which I don't think is warranted. So those are my submissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. Kupfer, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whitbread.
And I have none. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McFadden.
The $14.25 rent, is that close to what the actual rent is?
So the dentist is higher at $1,975. The accounting firm started at 14 and then stepped up to 16. But again, they got inducements.
Okay. That's the reason for you taking a lower rate then.
Well, I've taken the lower rate primarily because when you look at the comparables in the downtown Charleswood area, they're in the 13 to 14.75 range. So I've ended up at 14.25.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Well, thank you. So I have no additional questions. So is there anything else anybody, either party would like to add to our hearing today or raise?
I'd submitted a 2-page rebuttal brief.
Okay. All right. And you'd like to deal with that rebuttal brief?
Very quickly.
Okay. We have it for Mr. Newman?
I have to print it out.
Okay. We'll just take a 5-minute recess while Mr. Kumar prints it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Newman now has the rebuttal evidence in front of him. So, Mr. Kupfer, would you like to go through it, please?
So I wanted to include 3 excerpts relating to tenant inducements and leasing commissions, because it's something that's come up. You know, in the past, obviously, it's been brought to the Manitoba Municipal Board, and it's largely been settled, but it continues to be brought up at these hearings. So I want to provide just 3 cases in which the matter has been dealt. I'm not going to read and orate them all for you. It's all there in front of you if you want to. But essentially, these all state that tenant inducements, leasing commissions, free rent, and the like are not matters to be used for the reduction of the market value of properties. And I'm open to any questions about it. If you have any, it's just supporting information.
Thank you, Mr. Cutler. Mr. Newman, do you have any questions on the rebuttal evidence?
I do not.
Mr. Whitbread?
None, thanks.
Ms. McFadden?
No, I don't.
Okay, and neither do I. Mr. Newman, do you have rebuttal evidence? I'll ask.
I do not.
Okay, thank you. All right, then. We've now heard all the items scheduled and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.